everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Power Play podcast. And today, it is my pleasure to introduce a gentleman called Charlie Homewood, whom is the managing director of a very interesting business called Aktuel Translations Limited, founded in 1992 by a gentleman called Robin Bennett. Now, Charlie, from around 2012, started to work for this business as a translator, and his career has evolved in the last 12 or 13 years, clearly, to the position of managing director. He's going to tell us all about this business and all about the employee ownership trust, which is the model that Aktuel Translations is founded upon. So, Charlie, without further ado, welcome to our podcast. Thank you so much for joining in, and tell us about the business and about the journey today, please.
Hi, Alice. Thanks for having me on. Pleasure to be here. So no, as you rightly say, Actuel was founded in '92 by Robin Bennett, who's this sort of all singing, all dancing entrepreneur around Henley for years and years and years now. We started out in Battersea for the first 6 or 7 years, and then moved to Henley in the late '90s, and have been there ever since. Ultimately, we are a translation, localization, transcreation agency that aims, I would say we're more of the high end in terms of translation services. So translation is often split into, first of all, do you want something that is functional and cheap, or do you want something that is nuanced and a bit more highbrow, a bit more creative? And that's where we lean into. We like to style ourselves as a boutique agency, providing high quality translations to our customers, whether they are big businesses or someone local down the road who needs the odd bit of help here and there. We aim to have very personal, healthy relationships with all of our contractors. So we work with a team of 100 or more freelancers regularly they're fantastic. I mean, we've sort of nurtured these relationships over the last 15 years or so. Translation in the '90s, when we first started out, was a little bit like the Wild West. You had lots and lots of people who translation hadn't become this in the industry as it is now. And you had a lot of people working out of universities, sending off stuff handwritten, faxing things over. It was quite amateurish, maybe probably isn't the best way to describe it, but it certainly isn't what it is today. And so you had these huge problems with people who you kind of just had to take them at their word that they were good. And so when everything started changing in the 2000s, it became really, really important to find and retain that talent.
Charlie, how do you select a translator? What's the major criteria? How do you know that they're a good fit for this business?
Test pieces are often a good way initially. You get an idea for, you give them 200-300 words and see what they can do with it. That's not always a perfect way to do it. First of all, because translators, when they apply to agencies, are inundated with test piece requests, and so they don't always have time to do it. And also, that's not just because you've done something well once on a very, very small scale doesn't mean there's any guarantee it's going to happen long term. What we look for is subject matter expertise. So if I get a translator who comes to me and says, look, I do marketing translations into Italian, specializing in the automotive sector because I want, because I write things for car companies who are looking to sell their materials overseas. I will look at their specific skill set, and you can gauge a lot of it's feel. A lot of it is feel just by talking to the person, by seeing how they respond to you as an agency, seeing how knowledgeable they are in the subject matter. And then because we do all of the proofreading as well, between two trusted linguists and our in-house team who are doing QA checks at the end, you get a very good idea for the quality of what's being done.
So you said there were 4 people in-house and roughly 100 freelancers. So it's quite a sizable team. So the 4 people in-house then, you just mentioned proofreading and so is their job to effectively manage the external team to make
Exactly,
sure?
Yes.
Okay, I
Yeah,
see.
so our in-house team is four. It has been as high as seven in the past. Translation is so scalable. You can kind of, when I joined, there were two of us, and now then it's gone up to seven. It's down to four now. It just depends on sort of the need as and when. Our in-house staff, two of them also translate as well as project
Okay.
manage. So they're sort of doing both, and then we've got a project director who is basically the person who is in charge of overseeing the majority of the project. She does her own project management, of course, and is doing a lot of the back of house stuff. And then there's me sort of overseeing um, the whole work really. I mean, I say we have 100 freelancers. They're not all working concurrently. It's not like you've got 25 freelancers assigned to each project manager or anything
I
like that. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, we run the operation with four of us. At the moment, I think we've got something like 100 projects on the go, probably split between about 30 or 40 freelancers, and that's been the case for the last year or so.
Good
It
for
has
you.
been as high as 200 projects at any one time. Back in, I would say 2016, 17, it's been as low as 40 when I first joined, when we were really small. So, um,
What you don't know, Charlie, is that I have some experience in your sector actually. So I've
mm,
worked with a business in the translation sector, and I can tell you from as we're talking now, as I'm looking back in time, how difficult it was for that company to establish critical mass. And
yeah,
if you're at an average of around 100, pushing to 200, that's a substantial achievement. Well done. So that, of course, is an outcome of marketing, isn't it? So we know, don't we, from our general business education, that the two primary pillars that any successful business are built upon, one is team and the other is marketing. So we've covered team to an extent. I'd like to come back to it later on in the podcast, but talk about marketing now. So you must be adept at marketing, Charlie, in order to be able to drive this volume of work. Just to say there quickly to the viewer, to the listener, have a look at Actuel Translations Limited, because the website is extremely comprehensive. It's in depth. It's also got I noticed when I was looking at it earlier today, the style and the presentation is in keeping, I think, with the product, with the service, if that makes sense. So it's really worth a look, everybody. So take a good look at Charlie's website. So Charlie, tell us about marketing then. How do you approach the world of targeted marketing?
think because we're selling almost exclusively to businesses, we're essentially selling to people who either at least fully or partially know what they're looking for. And so
Okay.
very, very rare that a business will come to us and say, we might need some things translated in the future. What do you do? More often than not, they'll come to us with a specific thing that they need translated, be it a product manual, be it whatever it is. And that can extend even to people with literature they want translated from publishers. It could really be anything. And so what we have to do is we have to make it clear on our website that the specific thing that they need translated is also something that we offer. And not only that, but the language they need it into. So we focused first of all on having a place where people who, for example, want to search for just English to Spanish translation, say, that they know that when they go onto Actuel's site, that will be a service that is dedicated to them, and it's something that we take care about, and it's something that we can provide as our regular service.
So,
Um, and then it's split beyond that into types of translation. So we want to make it clear to people who are looking for technical documents to be translated that this is something we do. We want it to be clear, we want to be clear when people are looking for marketing, translation, or localization, that we have the expertise, that we have the translators on our books who are capable of doing that work really well.
so content clearly is king. Sorry to
Yes, absolutely.
clearly content is the way that you're educating. It's also, I'm hearing in your language there that you're looking to disqualify. You're looking to filter out as well as filter in, right? So, or not?
Yes, up to a point. We don't. We would never turn anyone away unless they're sort of time wasters or mad. And we have had both of those. So we had a chap come to us a few years ago who met at London Book Fair who had written this kind of mad screed about how France was taking over the EU or something. So,
I thought it
which
was.
was
Is it not?
well, it was a bit of an odd one, but he'd written this kind of 300-page manifesto that was terribly spell checked, and it was just hilarious and terrifying in equal measure. So I think we'd like to filter out those sorts of people. But it's more about showing people who have a really clear idea of what they're looking for,
Okay.
what that we can do it. And secondly, if you have only a vague idea of how the translation buying process works, then we can kind of guide you and sort of, one thing we used to do a lot of, and maybe less so now, is linguistic consultancy. So basically, companies would come to us and say, we want to market our products overseas. We're not entirely sure how much of our content would need to be translated based on what we're looking for. And we can then help them and say, yeah, you're right. Probably this one is a bit too technical. Maybe only, a handful of people are going to read that, but actually this is your public facing material. I think that would be a really good thing to do.
So how are you driving traffic at this website then? What's the methodology?
So we work closely with an SEO provider, and so they do a lot of sort of the back end work on that side of things. That's something we've actually been investing in quite heavily in the last couple of months, just because the translation industry is so saturated at the moment. It's important to make sure that we're constantly working to keep ourselves above, some of the bigger hitters. We don't have the budget of some of our rivals, but we like to think that we can beat them on quality. And so that's the niche we're trying to fill, I think,
Okay.
is that, we're not going to be able to compete prices offered by some of the bigger agencies who, frankly, also treat their translators pretty poorly. And so what we offer is a still very good value because we have very low overheads, and so we're able to pass on a lot of those savings to our clients,
I can
but
see
it's
that
still a premium
in your model.
service.
Yeah, I can see in your model that your structure is quite tight, which is interesting.
Yes.
Okay, management of marketing, Charlie. How are you doing that? Is there somebody in the team that's responsible for marketing? Are they putting 40 hours a week into the subject? Or are you working with an agency? Or how does it work for you guys?
A little bit of everything. So a lot of the copy on our site was written by a copywriter who we have a very close relationship with, a woman called Emma Humphrey, who's been working with us now for a year or so. And she has done a lot of she's really jazzed up our site recently to make it sort of approachable and sort of professional but friendly. That balance you're always looking to strike as a company. We don't have someone working full time on marketing. What we do have is we have a sort of hybrid arrangement with me, Robin, who was our former owner, who is
Yeah.
now doing a lot of sales for us.
Okay.
And from our perspective, sales and marketing are so tightly woven together
Of
that they might as
course.
well be the same thing.
They
And
are.
then Francesca, who is our project director, she's incredibly good at she's the one who really handles a lot of the SEO sort of management, talking to the contractor that we use for that, and making sure that the site is up and running. We have someone who's on a monthly retainer who just keeps the sites looking fresh, making sure that there's nothing's broken, that we're not getting 404 errors or anything like that. So it's a collective it's a collective endeavor between three or four of us to keep that moving along.
Tell me about planning in your business now. What are what kind of planning tools are you using to business plan, to marketing plan, to finance plan? How do you guys approach the principles of planning?
Translation's a very interesting one because it's you can't always plan in the way that maybe other businesses might be able to, because you can never predict your need. So what I'm really doing is I am building plans based on who I want to be talking to for the next 6 months, and then adjusting our marketing strategy depending on that. So for a really, really, really long time, 90% of our profits came from intellectual property translation. And so all of our marketing efforts were engaged in not only retaining our existing clients in that field, but also in going out to IP events in London and overseas, Copenhagen, for example, and making sure that we were talking to the right people, making sure that our name was at the forefront of people's minds when they were looking for patent translation. That patent market is slightly diminishing now, just because of the way various complicated things to do with the European Patent Office, and the need for translation is slightly diminishing. It's still there, it's just not as significant as it had been in previous years. And so now our planning has to be, okay, so we've been able to, for a really, really long time, rely on this steady stream of work from a very relatively small batch of clients. That stream is still there, it's just not quite as flowing as much as it used to be. So now we have to plan ahead to think, okay, well, what are the emerging markets? Where can we use the expertise of our freelancers and of us as a company that understand the language and is very, very good at managing those sorts of projects? What is our next step going to be?
So it sounds like the planning is very commercially focused. It's outcome based, isn't it?
It's very much outcome based, yeah.
So how far are you visualizing in the future as an ownership team then, as a trust? Are you saying to yourselves, look, here we are in 24, by the time we get to 28, 3 years from now, 3 financial years from now, the business will look like that, therefore we need to deliver that kind of commercial plan. Is that the way that you're doing it?
Really? No. So with the way translation, the way the translation market's very volatile at the moment, a lot of companies are convinced that AI is going to solve all of their problems. And so it's almost impossible. If you told me 5 years ago what the state of the translation market was going to be in 2024, I would have been a little bit skeptical. And so planning 3 years ahead in this industry is very, very difficult at this stage. What we what we can do, can this be is this sorry, are there going to be some edits to this? Because I realize I'm just
not now. No, we're rolling. You can just go for it. Come on, talk to me.
okay, sorry. I suddenly realized there was this enormous pause.
Don't worry about it. You're a human being thinking and talking, Charlie. It's perfectly fine.
It's almost impossible to know where we're going to be in 3 years' time. I think our job is to make sure that we are looking after the people we work with as well as possible. We want to be a company that has lowish turnover. We got into this turnover of staff, that is. We got into this phase a few years ago of almost being a bit like a training company. People would come to us straight out of university with a master's or a degree in translation or whatever it might be. They would work for us for 2 years and then they'd move on. And that was fine. That worked out okay for us. But what I think I really want to do is using the employee ownership structure that we have, provide so many incentives for the staff who work for us to stick around because they see that it's a company that's worth investing in. That we then have this really, really rock solid team. And that's the beauty of the EOT, is that because you are essentially profit sharing on quite a large scale, it means that your staff are much more invested in the success of the company. They're not just drawing a salary and then anything else can go hang. They're being financially compensated depending on how well the company does each year. And so that's a huge thing. It's because if you can, people can then come to me and say, I've got this wonderful idea. Why don't we look into this particular new sector? Because I know a little bit about this.
So there'll be people listening and watching this podcast that will be very concerned about that subject matter. We just got to stop for a second there, Charlie, and remind ourselves that the vast majority of small businesses are not sharing equity. They are wrestling with the fear of, I don't own 100% of it. How does that work?
Yeah.
So they're also concerned about what happens if I give shares to people or they own equity and they leave, or it's a complex space for people that don't understand it. So it's absolutely marvelous. Actually, I think 2 or 3 podcasts back in the series, we interviewed an accountancy business specializing in creating the
Sure,
the
yeah.
employee trust model or the equity share scheme or blah blah blah. So it's fantastic to talk to a businessman that is doing that with his team and with his business. Fantastic stuff because it's enlightened, Charlie. The hardest part of building your business is not marketing; it's people. So if you
Mm,
can get the right talent and retain them, you're on the right path. So let's change the subject very slightly now. You mentioned the dreaded AI a few minutes ago.
mm.
I've no idea what AI means, but apparently it's coming. I don't know. You have to laugh at my rubbish jokes, Charlie. That's part of the rules of being here. Okay, tell us then, how are you guys going to leverage AI? What does it look like in the future for you? Because it's not going anywhere. This is the future, isn't it? So how does it work?
AI, from my perspective, AI is a very fancy way of saying machine translation within a translation context. It is essentially doing the same thing as old-fashioned machine translation, just in a slightly different way. And it has a role. It has a role in very, I would say, low impact um, texts that don't require a huge amount of human input. So if I need to know how many bedrooms there are at my Airbnb, I could probably get that machine translated and it's going to be fine. But if I have something that is incredibly technical and requires an awful lot of technical expertise, it's not going to be sufficient to understand what is happening in a given file. It will, based on context prompts, it might be able to understand some of the word. It will understand the words, but it might not be able to apply them in the correct context. And that's incredibly important. It's something that a technical translator needs to be able to do. And secondly, it still can't write very engaging copy. And your job, if you're going onto the more creative side of translation,
It's
it can,
compelling, emotive, yeah.
yeah, you can almost, you can detect immediately when something's been written by AI because there is the, you talk about uncanny valley. It does have this slightly uncanny valley property of, I don't feel like there's any sort of love that's gone into this. And I think
Not yet, Charlie.
AI, no, not yet, yeah, quite, well, who knows. As it stands now, AI is something that a lot of um, companies are convinced is going to sort of solve everyone's problems. And it might solve some problems.
It
But I
will.
think from a translation perspective, our job is to say, yes, this can help you with some things, and we can, we use translation software that assists on that side of things when we need to. But we then have to say, look, this is where we add value. If you want to get your stuff machine translated and you don't really care about your brand tone of voice or anything like that, then that's absolutely fine. But where we come in is to say, okay, you've got this really, really, really dynamic brand that you've created in English. You need to be able to convey that love and that passion, that energy in French, in German, in Spanish, or whatever language it might be. And that's the point of difference that we provide between just a normal between an AI translation and what we do.
Beautifully described, and I get that you hit the button right on the head there for me. That was, yeah, very clear. I hope everybody listening and watching capture that, because in whether they're a cafe or whether they're a garage or whether they're providing financial, services, they have the same challenge. It's getting across the real differentiation, isn't it, John? As you say, it's the unique value proposition as it's referred to as well. So
Mm.
very interesting stuff. Okay, so tell us a little bit about what you're about then. Vision, values, mission, purpose. How are you guys? Don't forgive me when I say this, Charlie. Not so much about the specifics of what you're about, but how have you gone through the process of distilling these key points and making sure that the team buy into them?
I mean, I think the EOT is one of the biggest things that we've been able to use as a way of demonstrating our commitment not only to sort of the overall values of the company but also to our staff. I mean, you showered me with praise earlier for the EOT. That wasn't my idea. That was our old owner's idea. He sold the company to the trust, and we are very grateful that he chose to do that. He could have sold that to some other company and washed his hands of the whole thing and walked away, and he didn't. And that's a really big, and that's been a huge thing for us. We, because we're so small in terms of our in-house team, because our freelancers they work for us, but they're not bound to us in any way.
Sure.
Because we have such a small team, it means you can create these really personal relationships with people. We are not the sort of company that is looking to say, I want 25% growth every year. That's just not what we're about. If it happens because people are engaged and invested and they want to create a much bigger enterprise, then that's wonderful. And we will do everything we can to make that happen. By the same token, we're not going to be beholden to those numbers. We're not going, because we don't have shareholders, we don't have owners who are looking to draw a massive dividend each year. What we can do is we can actually run on um, we can have relatively stable turnover each year.
Mm.
Give our treat our staff very, very well, pay them well, and still run a very tight business that everyone wants to go up and go and
How do
work
you
for.
how do you summarize this for your team? Is it written down? Is there a code of conduct? Is there a core value statement? Is there something that that you run by?
Not internally. I don't really. I mean, I don't think people need it. I think if we got big, I might need to. But we are signed up to the Good Business Charter, which has these 10 sort of principles that you're
There you
supposed
go.
to be enshrined in. That's to do with employee welfare, environmental awareness, timely supplier payment, fair payment of tax,
Sure.
quality standards, all that sort of thing. And so when you join Actual, you know that we're joined up with the GBC, and you know that that's something that we
That's
strive
excellent.
to. We want to meet their standards.
Perfect.
We obviously have our own internal policies around environmental policy and things like that,
Mm,
but
mm, mm.
it's not as if when they come in, they have to sing the company song or anything. It's not quite like that. But
I'm slightly disappointed. I've got this
no,
image
I
now
know, I know.
of the car
Maybe
park.
next year.
Very funny. Hoisting the
No,
flag. Yeah, hoisting the
well,
flag.
we could do that. Maybe a big sort of flag of my face over the back of the thing. I don't know.
Not egotistical in any way. No, I get that. Yeah. Humble.
But
Nice.
it's right. But no, I think I also think that these things should be relatively self-evident just by the way you conduct yourself in day-to-day business. I
Oh.
think if you need to tell people we're a really good company,
Mm.
if you have to tell your staff how much of a good company it is to work for, probably not doing it right. It should probably be self-evident just by the way you treat the people around you. And that's what I do try to do. I don't like to overimpose um policies that and I mean it's obviously things need to be imposed as and when, but I don't like to make it so that every week you have to you know tick off that you've looked at these things or you've done these things.
Sure. It's not so
It it is not a systemic way of approaching it, but that's also because I can be quite haphazard in that sense myself. I think that's a reflection of my personality as much as anything else.
I don't. The only thing you need to remove is think. It's
Mm,
absolutely don't think it. It is the case. Every single business is a reflection of people that own it and run it, Johnny.
mm.
So look, the bottom line is here. What we're after in this podcast is not to judge whether you're doing it right or wrong. It's to explore how different people are doing it.
Yeah,
Uh,
absolutely.
all of the different business disciplines that we're talking about. And so just for the benefit of the listener, my take on what you said, Charlie, is that there is a distinct culture here, but it may not
Yes.
be that your culture is, what shall we say, defined in tablets of stone and presented in on the wall of the foyer. We may not be going to that extent, but clearly there is a modus operandi. There's a culture. There's a way of operating within this business. So congratulations on that, because again, very few small businesses are as defined as that.
Yeah, well, thank you. I think for me, flexibility is really important, and I, you're right. It isn't set in stone. This culture exists, but also because I think it's impossible to once you tell someone what your culture is, you're probably not living up to that culture. Culture comes from the people
Interesting.
within it. It's
Mm,
not set. It's not defined from above, and
mm,
so we probably had a very different culture 5 years ago as a result of the employees who were working there. They defined the culture to a certain degree, and within the framework that we provide just to be a functioning business, we're able
What's
to
your
adapt to that.
what's your number one value? You're the managing director of the company. What would you say that the number one value of the business is?
In terms of our relationship with our staff or with our
Or just
clients,
full stop. What's your number one value? What's your primary value? What would you say above all else? That is what we stand for. That's what we do.
I want to produce translated material that we can be proud of. I think
Okay.
that is our number one priority. And I think
Delivery of
if you
excellence.
can, yeah, and I think if that is the goal, then because you're aiming towards a quality product, the people you work for know that you value it, and
Mm,
they know that therefore their expertise is valued,
mm.
and then they are going to be happier than if they are stuck defending something that they don't believe in. I think that would be my
I,
ethos there.
I think that's great. That's very clear. And it's implicit, it's implied. It's clearly running through the organization. I can hear that. So leadership and management, Charlie,
Hmm.
changing subject again. What's your style? For the business owner watching or listening, how would you describe your leadership and management style to them?
Think I'm quite hands off. I don't like micromanaging people. I like giving people the tools to be able to do their job properly,
Mm,
to oversee it at a distance, to get involved when I need to.
mm,
But I ultimately want people to be able to understand what is good decision making within their job, and to be able to trust themselves to then make those good decisions. And
mm.
I will oversee that, but I won't impose it unless I need to. That is basically what I try to do,
How do you know when you need to or not?
because I am overseeing. I'm looking at it. I'm looking at these things closely. I'm just not engaging with it
Okay.
with them. So I'm aware of everything that goes on. I'm very,
Ah,
very aware of every single conversation
that's
over email that
that's
people are having.
that's a critical point. And again, you know, well done for it. Sorry if that sounds trite, but well done on acknowledging that point to everybody because, you know, the subject of abdication is massive in
Mm,
business, in particular small business. Management by hope, as we call it at Power Play,
mm.
um, fraught with danger, Charlie. So the fact that you're delegating and staying close and understanding what's happening is critical. Really interesting. So, what, in your opinion, then, what's the difference between leadership and management? How do you apply leadership to Actuel versus management and vice versa? Again, this is going to be an interesting answer for the people listening. They're learning from you this through this podcast, Charlie.
I think I'm not sure there's a huge difference. Well, I've never really thought about it, if I must say, if I'm honest. Um, I think for me, leadership is. I think first of all, you have to lead a little bit by example. I think you have to demonstrate a solid work ethic. I think you have to treat the people around you well. I think you have to be clear in your decision making. You have to make sure that you explain your decisions if it's things had been unclear. Um, in terms of management, I would say setting expectations is important. I'm not entirely sure I can distinguish between the two, because I've only ever been in this environment. So I left university in 2012. I joined Actuel. and as a translator, and I've stayed there ever since. So I've only known this really small business experience. So for me, management and leadership are almost inextricable from each other because
Right.
we've never been big enough for there to be these hierarchies.
If you just allow me to step in there, thank you for
Mm,
pausing, Charlie. You put your finger on something that's endemic within the small and medium-sized business community. So we've got to remember that there's 5.3 million businesses in the country that are less than 49 employees.
yeah.
5.3 million, right? So you guys are a example of that business model, pardon me, sorry, scale. And I can honestly say to you that it's very rare for me to meet somebody and interview somebody in that arena that understands the difference between leadership and management. Most people think they're managing when they're actually leading, and vice versa. So your answer is typical of a professional in your space. So for the benefit of the viewer, the listener, and for your good self, Charlie, the difference is very simple. Leadership is about the human being. It's about inspiring, creating culture, bringing the people with you. Management is about process. It's about actually getting them to do what you've employed them to do. So the
Mm.
subjects are quite delineated, quite separate. So there's an interesting observation there. So listen, we got one final question today, and that is that we are about to change the name of our podcast. As I said earlier on, we're going to change it to the Wealth Equation podcast. Okay, the Wealth Equation podcast. So the Wealth Equation within the confines of our paradigm here at PowerPlay, Charlie, is money,
Mhm.
finance, multiplied by time, multiplied by health. So the wealth equation is to have a balance of all three,
Yeah.
ultimately. You are wealthy, in inverted commas, when you have all three. So maybe you want to take a look at Robin Bennett's situation and work out whether he's wealthy, because he probably is scoring highly in all three, if he is, right? So from your perspective as a business leader, which one of those three is your priority right now in your business? Where are you focusing? Is it money? Is it time? Or is it health?
I think we have, I think time. I think, I think wealth can, I think the finances can flow from time. And I think
That's a
if you
great.
are a, if you're able to use your time efficiently and use it to target it at the right things, you can generate enough income to leave the financial side. You know, that could take care of itself. I want the people who work here to not feel like they are constantly having to deal with a series of very, very, very intensive time pressure situations. Now, translation can be very, very time intensive because you're always having to hit deadlines and it's very difficult on that side of things. But what I think I want people to understand is that, you know, we do have this, we've had this in the past where people will say, oh, I was unable to get this thing done during the day because something else came up. And so I finished it off at 7:30 this evening. And I don't, I want people's spare time to be their own. I really, really strongly believe in this, the right to switch off. I think they call it in the EU now. I think that's something that's incredibly important. And
Back to
it was
culture.
something it was something I was guilty of when I first joined, is that I felt like I had to be working, you know, 2 or 3 hours. If, not every day, mind, but you know, I was putting in quite a lot of overtime just very quietly without really sort of mentioning it. And
Nice.
I would rather people came to me and said, look, I feel like my time, either I'm not managing my time effectively or my time isn't being managed effectively for me.
So can
And
you
I
can you see how the three are interwoven?
absolutely, yeah.
So
Completely.
if you're driving a culture that is time focused, valuing of time, you're going to have an impact on the health of the individual, mentally and
Yes.
physically. And you put your finger on it beautifully, you're more likely to have a financially stronger outcome, you
Mm.
know? So I think that's a great answer, and I really hope that people listening, that resonates with them. Um, so I just want to wrap up today's interview, Charlie, by saying something along the lines of, for me, what's coming out through this interview is that, or this discussion, is that Actuel is a business that's founded on, I want to say, an identity which is really quite strong. And it's clear to me that you're having a big impact on that identity as the MD, and so you should, rightly so, but it's clearly there. I've really enjoyed the discussion, beginning in the commercial space and winding our way through the organization, from people to marketing to culture to business planning, even at stages,
Mm.
leadership management. We've covered a lot of ground there. Been a really interesting interview, Charlie. Thank you so much for joining in. I've enjoyed your
No,
company as well.
thank you for having me on. It's been very interesting. You ask questions. You've maybe posed questions in a way I've never thought about them before. So that's very helpful.
That's good to hear. Thank you, Charlie. Well, listen, come back again. Maybe in 6 or 12 months' time, when we're able to meet again and revisit one or two things, see how you've progressed this business, right?
Sounds great. Fantastic.
Thank you again, Charlie. See you soon.
Thanks very much. Take care. Bye.
Bye bye.